We are once again with Faith and with Pastor, and let me, we had who we bring into the relationship, and now the next series is that next chapter is what do we do after we say hello? So I'm going to cue that up, and let's go ahead and begin with prayer. Dear God, I'm relying on you. Speak to me and tell me what to say. Speak through me and console the other. Speak for me and tell the other what he or she needs to hear. Oh, and Lord, tell me when to be quiet too. Thanks for being faithful. Amen. We've already kind of touched base a couple weeks ago with a few of these slides, but the question that we always begin, two questions, is what stuck out to you about the chapter, and what have you been, when have you been in this situation and it went badly? And not just this particular chapter, but has anything come to your mind in the last couple of weeks as you've been thinking about this book? It doesn't have to be this chapter, it could be previous chapters, but anything stuck out for you, and has there been anything where it's like, I can relate? I can relate. Of course, this title is What Do You Say After You Say Hello? I'm sure all of us probably can relate to what do I say? When someone has a death, a sudden death, that typically is one time, or you go to the funeral home and you go to the family. When you're standing in line waiting to speak to the person, I'm sure what's going through your head is, what do I say? Any answers to that? Do you have a go-to thing that you say?
I'm so sorry.
I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Sorry for your loss.
Sorry for your loss. And I'm not sure we're going to have really any concrete answers, but just some things to think about. How do you start a conversation when visiting someone that just experienced something tragic, like a death of a loved one? It's devastating news from the doctor. How do you start the conversation? How about, it's good to see you? Your next move may not be words at all. It could be a touch. How do you touch depends on your relationship with the person. We kind of talked about that. How well you know the person, how comfortable you would be, and how comfortable you think they would be. You haven't sung songs to a heavy-hearted one. You've greeted your friend, shared what's in your heart, and possibly touched him or her. Hurting people usually want to talk about their life situation. They will seize the opportunity to do so when given a chance. Your immediate goal is simply getting them to talk about what is concerning them right at that moment. That will be enough. If you allow it to happen, you don't have to think up perfect formula answers to questions. You don't have to theologize or psychologize or sing away the other's heavy heart. You couldn't do it anyway. And this is kind of where we ended a couple weeks ago with this particular slide. But yeah, we talked about people oftentimes want to share, and maybe not. Maybe it's too soon. And so how do you determine? Do they want to share? Do they not want to share?
Leave it up to them.
Leave it up to them?
You say you're there for them if they want someone to talk to.
Yeah.
And leave it up to them.
Can you listen?
Yeah.
Listen.
Yes.
Listen. And I know that some people read body language better than others. You always have that phrase, read the room. You come into the room, and I think we all have the ability to do that. I think what it takes is not to just walk in and just start talking and start doing whatever, is slow down. Walk in and at least look at the situation. Look at the person. And don't, because sometimes, and yeah, I said you're standing in line, you're going through what you're going to say, but kind of maybe step back a little bit and just read the situation, read the room. try to pick up on what the person's communicating with their body language. And yeah, ask very open-ended questions, anything I can do. And wait for their response, and then you can kind of go from there. But yeah, Lynn said, listen. You can never listen too much. You've heard it be said, 2 ears, 1 mouth, listen twice as much as you speak. Yeah, just listen. Follow the other person's lead. What is your best response to the news of a very sick or very old person's death? Say, I'm sorry to hear that, and wait for your friend to indicate how or he or she feels about the situation. Your friend may very well say it's for the best, or my mother lived a long life and a good life. And then you could agree. You might even open the door to further sharing of feelings by saying, I suppose so, but I would imagine it still hurts. I gotta mention Dee once every time we get together, but no, Nora, her grandmother died a few weeks ago, and she's been in hospice, and so yeah, we know it was expected, and so yeah, we got the news about a week ago that Linda had passed, and of course, yeah, it was expected, but I think your text said that, but I'm sure it still hurts, or I forget exactly what you said, but it's that kind of sentiment that even though it's expected, it still hurts. It's still, there's a loss, and by saying that, you give them the opportunity to share what they may be feeling at that time. To agree and then move on, or oh yeah, it still hurts, or yeah, Nora, she can't help but think about her grandfather and her father, so yeah, just how's the family? That's one of the things I ask, when I'm talking to a person, that I understand that oftentimes they are thinking about others, so it's like, well, how's everyone else doing? And it gives them an opportunity to start talking. And then as they talk about others, then maybe you can redirect it back to them. It's like, but I see that you always care about what other people are feeling, but how about you? How are you feeling? And they may shut you down. I'm fine. And don't press it. It's like, speak to me, talk to me. I know there's something going on there. It's like, that's not a good approach. Give them some space. But if you let them know that you're there for them, it's possible that they'll open up at a later date. They're not ready to open up at that moment. Any thoughts, experiences that you've had?
Well, I think, you mentioned that at the funeral home, a lot of people are not willing to really open up about deep feelings.
Yeah.
There's a big crowd, they're feeling that responsibility of, it's almost like you're hosting an event, so they want to keep it together. So yeah, it's usually at a different time that you would have a chance to speak with them by themselves.
Yeah.
That they might share more.
Yeah, funeral homes always visitation. I mean, you kind of. I'm not knocking any of that. We have our customs, we have our traditions, but sometimes I wonder, what's the funeral home visitation? I mean, I see benefits from it, but who is it more benefiting? I mean, I think oftentimes the family understands that as an opportunity to allow people to come and share their condolences. It's almost like the family, it's really the family hosting an event, giving people an opportunity to share their, and it's not something I'm not saying they don't benefit from that, because sometimes you see people visit, but I don't know, I'm speaking off the top of my head, but I wonder, well, what is the whole purpose of visitation? Who's it for? For the family or for the people visiting, or both? I'm sure it's a little bit of both.
When John's mom passed, we had a chance to hear from so many people about what she meant to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was meaningful. Because, there were things that we didn't know that we found out at the funeral.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, I'm not knocking it, because I think it has its benefits. And I think that it goes both ways, because my experience is, because I've sat down sometimes in the back, and I'll come and I will greet the family, but sometimes I'll stay and sit in the back and just kind of watch. And, because especially those that go on for 2 or 3 hours. Of course, it's interesting, different areas have different customs. When I came here to Ohio, and then other places started doing this, but here, what I've seen that I didn't really see before I came here is a visitation prior to the funeral. And usually, most places I've been, visitation was always the night before, and you've had that here in Ohio. But this is the first place I've seen where you don't see that as much as the hour before the service. Like I said, different places do different things. But as I sit and experience that, especially the 2 or 3 hours the night before, the family has an opportunity to spend some time, because this is a long time. And so you have a few people greeting others, but you have family members off to the side. And yeah, things will happen that you didn't expect. I mean, it's like, okay, I'm doing this so that people have an opportunity to share their condolences. But you're right, there are times that stories are shared that are really kind of helpful and neat for the families. Like, oh, I didn't know that. And vice versa. The family will share things. And so it's interesting. Just some of the things that come out of visitations. But yeah, it's like given. Really wanting to care for the person, you're kind of opening a door to a conversation that could take place later on.
I was at a funeral that was a layout or visitation.
Yeah.
She's a friend, and a super close friend, and she had a bar restaurant, and so she knew lots of people, but tragically one of her sons was showing somebody a gun, and the gun went off and hit him in the head and killed him instantly. And he was only about 30, I guess.
Hmm.
Which a couple of interesting ones. I mean, it's like, really, the best you can do is say, I'm so sorry. And I think being there for that person, and then for the other people, when it's so sudden like that, and he was young and so many friends, for them to be able, and it wasn't open, it was open, but he had a little ball cap on, and
Yeah.
it was on the other side of his skull. But they could see it, and like, it's a bit presenting reality, I think, with an open casket like that, if you can.
Yeah.
So, and then they could share with her, but she was, it was the most interesting kind of presentation. It was like she was running around hosting, like you said, she had no crying, at least not then. I'm like, I would be, of course, a mess or somewhere, but so later she was able to grieve.
Yeah.
But at that time, just taking care of business, kind of getting through it, I suppose.
But I've been to so many of these. It's interesting. I mean, you see a definite difference between families that have faith and families that do not. Church-going and some who aren't. And typically, if I'm going to services that there's connection to the church for the most part. But that hasn't always been the case. I mean, I remember going to a student's father who died, one of our Lutheran school students, wasn't a member. and divorced family, and lived with his mother, but the father, and it was definitely, as at the funeral home, they were all unbelievers for the most part. And yeah, it's just very, very different. But an opportunity as well. I mean, I went to a young person. I mean, I was doing a funeral for a young person who died of an overdose, and it was just a graveside service. And it was most of the people there were between 15 and 30, and many of them never probably heard a sermon before, you know. And so yeah, as a pastor anyway, saw that as an opportunity. But I made a point to just stay there afterwards, you know, just step back and just to see if anybody would approach me, and somebody did. Just had some questions, and it was just an opportunity to just share, you know, my faith, you know, and you know, do you have a relationship with God, kind of thing, and yeah, and, you know, just kind of. I think as Christians, the biggest thing we do is just look for an opportunity. You know, it never does any good, I believe, to force the issue, you know, but just read the room, look for an opportunity. You know, there was one funeral I did where the son had left for some time ago, and he went down to Houston. He was a business person, and he wasn't ever involved in church. But I remember he was just really struck. It was his father who had passed, and he wanted to stay there. You know, because usually you leave the cemetery, and you know, you don't watch them pour the dirt onto the casket. But he wanted to. He wanted to stick around for the whole thing, and so it's like I kind of took that as an opportunity for me to stick around as well. I mean, everyone else left, but he stayed there, and you know, we ended up having a conversation, and he talked about being in the business world of Houston, and you know, cutthroat and dog eat dog, and he just pretty much conveyed the fact that he didn't think there was a room for God in that scenario, and it's like, you know, and this was in Fort Smith, and he was in Houston. I'm thinking, I lived in Houston for 8 years. I did Bible studies down at the Shell building, you know, for a businessman lunch. And we had members who were executives for Chevron and Shell. And it's like, you know, don't tell me that there's no room for God in the business world, because these are top executives for these oil companies. But I shared those words with him. I said, really? Really? And, you know, I just kind of, you know, talk to me about that. Why do you feel that way? You know, and but then you know, but of course it hit him because he's seeing death, and it's like, what is beyond this world, kind of thing. And you know, see, he was kind of philosophizing to a certain extent, but what's the meaning of life? And I said, well, what do you think the meaning of life is? You know, so yeah, I think we all have opportunities, I believe, in various situations. But remember from the beginning that your conversation with the suffering person is not about us, meaning not about you and the other person, as conversations usually flow. It is strictly about the one who is suffering. And certainly there's going to be times where you are suffering yourself. And so, I mean, you know, family or whatever, it's going to be about us. It's going to be about your relationship, about the person. But we're strictly talking about don't sing songs to a heavy heart, you know, when you're intentionally trying to help someone, to try to get beyond yourself and think about, okay, my goal here in this particular situation is how can I help this person? And so to help them, it has to be somewhat counterintuitive, because typically our conversations flow with, you know, a relationship and a mutual sharing and that sort of thing. That's how typically conversations go, but you have to kind of get beyond that. It's okay, I'm going to be here for this person, 100%. And if I'm going to be here for this person, I'm going to have to approach it somewhat differently than what I would normally do. Sharing personal experiences. I had a conversation with somebody here after one of the classes. Can we talk about sharing personal experiences? Is that always a bad thing? No, not necessarily. Use personal experiences sparingly. Share personal examples later rather than sooner. Like I said, these are things just to consider. Be brief. You don't need to relay every aspect of your experience. Sharing how you handle the painful situation can either be helpful or harmful to a hurting individual, so you have to think about that. Avoid telling a suffering person about a traumatic, painful, or difficult experience that you have endured. Consider how your story might affect the distressed person before you decide to share it. If you have been through an experience similar to the one an individual is facing, you could share information that would relieve his or her anxiety or otherwise help him or her to face the experience. So it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. But I think the biggest thing you think about is, why do I want to share this? You know, it's like, oh, you think you got it bad? Well, let me tell you a story. You know, it's like, that's not a good reason to share. You know, it's like, okay, ask yourself, why do I want to share that? And it's quite possible somebody's going through chemotherapy, you know, and you've gone through some chemotherapy. So I think to a certain extent it would probably be foolish not to share that you've been through it. You know, I'm not sure you want to share the fact that, yeah, I threw up every single night. Kind of, you know, it's like, I'm not sure you want to actually go that, but to share that, you know, I've been through that. I know this has to be tough, and I know our experiences are different. But I just want I want to be here for you. You know, how are you experiencing? How is it affecting you right now? You know, so to share the fact that you've been through that, I think might open the door to some questions that they may have. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. But yeah, how much to share? Think through that, I think, before you actually share. Sharing your personal experiences can communicate a powerful message. You are not alone. I think that's the biggest message that can be shared. Your personal story may also communicate hope to the other person. Just be careful not to shift the focus away from the suffering individual. You're still sharing it because you want to help them, not for it to be a therapeutic thing for you. At least that's not the time and place for that. Any questions? Chris?
In my family, this is sort of similar, but talking about viewings, that was like the most important thing in our suddenness. It brought such laughter.
Yeah.
And it was very needed. But, for example, you put a jar of beans because someone canned beans and shared. It was such a big thing. And sharing back and forth was a big thing. And when my cousin passed away, everyone was saying, yeah, they went through this and I went through this. And one of my family members stood up and said, you know what? This poor child had a dark cloud over her forever. And he said, sometimes we all just need to forget about us and just be the umbrella. You know, to keep the rain off of them, even though we're in the rain too.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they just need the umbrella. And for some reason that really moved me, and that made me think of, yeah, say your own stuff, but sometimes they just need the umbrella,
Yeah,
even though we're in it with them.
that's cool. It's a neat visual. Anyone else? There is one kind of story that should never be shared: horror stories. What strange impulse compels people to respond to the news of another's suffering with, oh yeah, my uncle had that and he died, or some variation thereof. From job loss to illness, there seems to be a horror story to match or exceed every situation. Yeah, try to resist the urge to share that.
It reminds me of the saying, the prayer, Lord, put your hand on my shoulder and your other one over my mouth. Because sometimes you have to just hold your tongue.
Yeah. And it's not easy, especially if you have antidote, you have or you feel you have a solution to their problem. That it's like, I think I can solve this problem for you. You know, it's like it's hard to not chime in.
I was thinking also, when you were talking about funerals being opportunities, we went to a funeral of one of John's co-workers' sisters, and she had cancer. She was a young person, and her and her brother, who John worked with, had gotten super involved in a church, but her father never did it. And at the funeral, he was actually baptized. And we'd never been to a baptism before. Seen the baptismal, what do they call it, pool or whatever, behind the
Baptistry, yeah.
But I was telling that story to another friend who was from a different tradition, and she was like rolling her eyes, like, just like those Baptists to try to get a baptism in on a funeral because you're scared you're going to die and go to hell. And she didn't say anything like that,
Yeah, which is.
but it was that feeling of, I think we have to respect the feelings of a person that's grieving, and if they're angry at God, allow that.
Mm-hmm.
If they're questioning God, allow that. If they're, it can be an opportunity, but not be so quick to jump on Jesus is the answer kind of conversation, because
Yeah.
it's not always the right time for that.
Yeah, what's hard to resist is I'm uncomfortable for whatever reason. And so I want to alleviate my uncomfortableness rather than, well, maybe this person needs to share even if it makes me uncomfortable, or whatever. You don't need to be totally passive during such silence, nor be not by any means. Touch the individual, suffering individual, hold the person's hand, pat a shoulder, give a hug, whatever is appropriate. Cry together. Okay, I wanted at some point in time, we need to cover a couple of these chapters in one session. So I kind of wanted to, see how we can get through most of this, just so we can finish by Easter time. But yeah, the prayer in the next chapter is cry, feel awful. In other words, it kind of follows what we just talked about. It's okay to cry. It's okay to feel awful. Dear God, sometimes I feel uncomfortable when someone cries in front of me. I know you provide tears for times when words aren't adequate to express the depth of pain and suffering. Jesus wept. Teach me to embrace the tears of those who are hurting and at times even to weep with them. Tears are cleansing. Denying tears to hurting individuals can prevent them from working through and cleaning out their pain right at the most appropriate and beneficial time for this cleansing. Bearing feelings, pretending that all is well, keeping a stiff upper lip, is a very real danger to one's emotional, psychological, spiritual, and physical self. but you know, we're all kind of tempted to do that. It's like, you know, especially at a funeral, you have someone who needs to be strong for others, or at least they feel they need to be strong for everyone else. You see the matriarch or the patriarch. You know, it's like, I need to be strong for my family. And like I said, you can't shape them, and it's like, please open up. You know, but once again, you provide an opportunity. It's like, you know, or invite them to lunch later in the week. You know, what I've found oftentimes is what happens a week later. You know, when you have, especially when a spouse dies, they've been married for 40, 50 years, and all the family's there, and sometimes family members, you know, continue to be around for a period of time, but at some point in time, they usually are going to be by themselves, and that's usually when reality hits. And of course, back to Stephen ministry, I think that's a perfect time to, you know, have a Stephen minister to be there for them. But to think about, if we know of people in that situation, you know, to make a point to interact with them in one way or another when they're all alone. You know, can we go to lunch together? And once again, you kind of let, you know, organically, you know, just let it happen. However,
We were at a service, it was a close cousin, but a very close, right here in town, that the husband died unexpectedly, and they always went to Hawaii, and so the wife, because she wanted everyone to dress like in Hawaiian shirts and be happy about it, and he was a coach, high school coach and teacher, and they had an auditorium and tons of people were there. I went up to hug my cousin, and it was like, I couldn't help it, I like cry, and she was like, no crying, I'm not gonna cry at this service.
yeah,
I was like, uh-oh.
okay,
But I mean, I wasn't gonna be like sobbing out loud. She wanted to make it happy. I
yeah,
understand that, but she wanted people to celebrate.
yeah. And you know, it's you know, I've had comments with Lutheran funerals. You know, I always have a title. You know, you hear a celebration of life, oftentimes, or the service starts off as a service of praise and thanksgiving to God for the gift of His child, and people who are unfamiliar with Lutheran funerals, and they've been to other funerals that haven't really been joyful, because the service spends the entire time talking about what this person did, and really you hear very little mentioned about heaven and eternal life. And sometimes I've heard people, you know, come afterwards like, I've never been to a service like this, and they found it to be refreshing, that it was kind of joyful, you know, when you talk about heaven and eternal life, and it is, or supposed to be anyway, comforting. You know, not that you don't have grief, you know, like I said, but still to know that there's hope. And that's you know, back to the father of a student, you know, that was the most depressing funeral I've ever been to, you know, because I was just there in attendance. I don't know who was leading it, a family member, whatever, but the casket had 8 guitars around the casket because he was a guitar lover, and the whole service, Roy just talked about him, you know, and what he enjoyed, what he loved, what his passions were, that sort of thing, and they kind of left like, that's all over now, you know, and it just there was no hope. And I found that to be quite sad. You know, but to be able to be joyful. And I'm glad that traditions have changed to a certain extent. I think I mentioned once before that years ago, you didn't bring children to funeral homes, or even sometimes not even to funerals. And I've always found when children are around, there's joy and laughter, more so than when they're not around. And I think it just adds a layer of happiness. When a suffering individual describes how he or she feels, believe what you hear and communicate your belief. You are not that person. You can't truly feel what he or she feels, but you can refrain from disbelieving or trying to talk that person out of his or her feelings. So what does that mean? Have you seen this happen?
When John's when his mother's second husband died, his daughter, Norm's daughter, expressed anger at her dad. And his mom was, "Oh, you mustn't be angry. That was not appropriate."
Mm-hmm.
She was, and I mean, she was very uncomfortable with the thought of someone being angry and didn't think it was appropriate. So, and that's her generation. That was her generation, So, I mean, I don't judge her for that thought, but I felt for her. I felt for Norm's daughter, in that situation.
There was what I think of when I think of this is somebody has a diagnosis of terminal cancer, and given maybe a few weeks to live or a few months to live. There can be a tendency from some. It's like, no, you're going to beat this. You're not going to die. And I'm not saying it's wrong to be optimistic, but this person is kind of dealing with the fact that death is going to be a reality, most likely, and to approach this person by saying, we're not going to talk about that, you're not going to focus on that. It's like, is that the best course of action? So how do you say, we're going to see if we can beat this, but yet allow them also to work through the process that, death is most likely to be a reality? Is there a balance to the two, or? Because I think to a certain extent, it's okay to focus on the fact that I will most likely die. I'm not saying that we're not going to do what we can to extend my life, but because I've been in the hospital rooms where and I think it was helpful. I mean, Dee's father was actually giving a diagnosis that because he had a heart that couldn't be repaired, that it was leaking. And it's like, there's nothing to be done. This will not last. And it's one example. I can think of a half a dozen others where you knew that there's no solution. But that was okay. He was able to work through that, the family, his wife, and can accept it in faith. And to deny that It's like, we're not gonna talk about that. We're going, you know, it's like, I don't think that's the best thing for them. But denying a person's feeling, or refrain from disbelieving what they're saying. It's like, you know you're wrong. Don't do that. You know, just let them work through that. When suffering people realize that you are hearing and believing them, they experience great comfort. Your simple act of validating a person's feelings can help that individual not to feel alone. In recognizing the pain or discomfort he or she is feeling, you become a partner with that person. You communicate that you share in his or her world. You warm the person's heart. Nobody wants to hear you're wrong in feeling that. That's not helpful. What can you say when a hurting individual tells you, I don't want to do that? Now this is interesting, you know, especially when there's medical things to do. Carry through on a difficult decision. Take a painful medical test. Whatever the painful situation is, a validating response is, of course you don't. If appropriate, you might add, I wouldn't either. With these words, you are validating the person's pain and discomfort. He or she has suddenly gained a soulmate in you, one who understands how difficult the situation is and affirms his or her feelings. So yeah, you have a procedure to go through. It's like, I don't want to do this. And of course, it's tempting. Family members do this all the time. It's like, Mom, you have to do it. You know, you got no choice. You are going to do this. You know, and it's like, maybe family members can get away with this. I don't know, but you know, to really say, I understand how you feel. You know, and let them share. You know, and maybe eventually kind of work around. It's like, so what are your options? You know, and of course, I mean, there's times when people take the option of not going through chemotherapy or radiation or whatever. Just, you know, and I don't know. I'm not saying that's easy for families to deal with that. I know in my own family, there was a situation where didn't want to take any more treatments, and I had a sibling who, no, you're going to, you know, she has to. And it's like, no, she doesn't want to. No, you know, and it's like, just didn't want to accept the fact that this person can die. Yeah, so validating feelings. And so what the response is, yeah, that's kind of hard. Yeah, I can understand how you wouldn't want to do that. Let's talk about this. What would you want to do? You know, and I think at least they know that you're hearing them. You know, because just to say you're going to do it and you have no choice, I don't know. Like I said, maybe family members can get away with that, but for the most part, as a caregiver, you want to let them share. Any thoughts on that? Any ideas? Differing ideas? You might be concerned that in saying these words, you are aiding and abetting the individual in avoiding something necessary. Not at all. You aren't saying, I don't think you should do that. Rather, you are telling the individual you understand how difficult it is. This response not only communicates that the hurting individual has a soulmate, but it also builds your credibility for possibly talking with that person later about following through with what needs to be done. So you're not saying, I think you're right, don't do it. It's like, I'm sure it's difficult. Because we all know older people can be quite stubborn. You know, how do you handle that stubbornness? Every action has a reaction. So to butt heads with them, oftentimes it's not the best thing to do. Let them talk, let them share why you feel that way. If you are well acquainted with the hurting person, one of the most powerful caring acts you can do when you genuinely feel it is to share the hurt. You can do this by putting your hand on the person's shoulder, giving him or her a hug. You can join in tears with the person feeling bad and suffering right along with him or her. Caution, do not take this so far that the suffering person suddenly feels obliged to become a caregiver for you. You aren't trying to reverse roles here. Your tears are simply telling the other person that you are feeling his or her pain too. Because I've seen people take this too far. That you're sobbing more so than they are. So it's like, oh man, I don't want that. You know, so they want to reverse roles. And it's like, be careful not to do that. Let's see, how many more of these? People too commonly try, we'll stop with this one. People too commonly try to give pep talks when others are in pain. It doesn't work. What does? Sharing the pain on a deep level. Don't avoid those who are mourning. Instead, reach out to them, embrace their weeping, and weep right along with them if that's natural and appropriate, both for you and the situation. In other words, share the hurt. And I think we'll stop there because the next one kind of talks about, we can begin because it's just, there's still about 4 more. But being angry with God, it's okay to be angry with God. We'll start off there, because we did kind of reference this a little bit here. But we'll be able to get through this and then the next one, chapter next week. And so I think we'll be on track. Okay, let's close with a benediction. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, love of God the Father, the fellowship of the Holy Spirit, be and abide with us all. Amen.
Amen.